There are a lot of men whom I like really like as people, but don't like romantically, right? For whatever reason, I always think that people should like them romantically, and I'm just like, and it's because they're good for people. It's just like, but why don't I like people who are good for me? It's a question, right? Why don't I like people who are good for me? And I don't know the answer to that. Somebody put it this way. Somebody said that I was disconnected. Like, I could be in love with somebody intellectually, right? And it could not be a sexual thing at all. But I love them, you know? Like, I'm just like really in love with them, intellectually, and but it's not anything sexual. Like the sexual connectedness isn't there. Like the romantic aspect of it just isn't really there. It's like it doesn't get that way. And I admire them. I admire their like intelligence and whatnot, right? But the thing is, but it is an intimate thing because it's an intimate thing on an intellectual front, but it's not intimate physically. Like, I'm not attracted to them in that sort of way physically, though I can tolerate them physically. It's that. They're just attractive enough, but they're like, but it's disconnected. Whereas like the sexual attraction could be for somebody I don't really respect all that much. I mean, I'll respect them in some sense. It's not that I entirely don't respect them. It's just that I don't. They're not the ones that I really like. They're not the ones who I really absolutely have to like mind meld with. Essentially, is what I'm saying. And it was really interesting to think about it this way. That it, like, for some people, it has to be like everything, right? Whereas I don't see that. It's just never connected. The sexual attraction is never connected to the intellectual attraction necessarily. Whereas for some people, like John the Apostle, yeah, like for like appropriate people, like I say, I always say like people ought to like them, and the reason why they ought to like them is because they're like able to holistically, feel in a relationship, and so they're like healthy in that sort of sense because they're emotionally available, because that's connected. The intellectual attraction, the physical attraction, and the sexual attraction, it's all connected. And it's a part of that is emotional, but at the same time, somebody else pointed out that certain men are, what you're attracted to is what they've worked for. You're not attracted to like their particular dotings on you because they don't know very much about you. In fact, it's like they're. So let me just try to explain this to you. Okay, so the warrior statesman class of persons, right? They're really busy. They're governing large groups of people. Okay, they have to see everything, from the top down, and they're very high level people who still have to kind of manage the nitty gritty stuff. They have to get into everything, and so they're so busy. They're filled with everything from the high level to the low level, right? So they're filled with visions and details. And when you're filled with visions and details, you don't have any brain contents or cognitive capacity left to dote on a romantic partner, because there's this guilt, right? Where if you're devoting to somebody who's an individual and it's for your own self, and you see that your people are suffering, it's just, that's just a very, like, in like Mandarin Chinese, it's called 矛盾. It's a 矛盾. I don't know how to explain it in English, which is like so strange because I'm better at English by far. But it's a conflict. That's a better word. Yes, conflict is a good word. Okay, so it's a conflict of opposition. It's a conflict where you cannot have your cake and eat it too, right? Because you only have so much resources cognitively in terms of time, such that you can devote it to your people or you can devote it to a romantic interest, right? So as a person who has to govern a lot of people, there's that, right? So I think that a part of it is that at this rank level, you expect it. Like, I expect it because that's just what I see. In my family, it's what I see, and I don't, obviously, I don't get into my parents' like business. I don't get into my parents' like, or my grandparents' like individual businesses. But, you know, the point is that my concept of what is proper, okay, as a person who has to govern eventually a lot of other people and a lot of other suffering people, it's too selfish to dedicate any type of cognitive wherewithal to a romantic partner, because, and people will tell you, you know what, you have to be like, you know, balanced, you have to have like work-life balance and whatnot, but at the same time, you know, it's like, I don't think I can do that, and I don't think that a lot of people can do that. I think that a lot of people cannot depart from that, because you can explain away like certain things that are really close to you, but in terms of, I think romantic relationships are kind of like, it's on top of the icing, you know, it's the cake and then there's the icing and it's on top of it. It's like for special occasions almost, like, right? So there's a certain expectation, and I don't even expect it, which is why I think just everything falls apart. Because the reason why things fall apart is because you don't allow for the personal, which is, if you're like of this, you know, warrior statesman class of persons of, or even above, of just, you know, people who are governing, it's really difficult to say, you know, you're not a public entity, you don't belong to your people, because you do, right? Which is exactly the reason why, like, Jesus Christ gave his life, you know, and at least he had a loss tonight. Yeah. Okay, well, here's the thing. He had friends, yes, but we're kind of at the stage where I think that there is just too much going on, that there's just, I don't think anyone who is in a leadership position or in a leadership role ought to dedicate much of any time and energy to their personal lives and the personal details, simply because we're kind of in a state of emergency at this pivotal juncture where it's really like, you know, we're either going to make it or we're not. It's like we're all about to fall off the cliff, essentially, you know. And so, you know, back to the romantic thing about, like, you know, separatedness, like separating the types of attractions, right? You could adore somebody, like, intellectually and not be attracted to them at all, or you can be, like, enough attracted to them to which, you know, the summation of all of your attractions makes sense for you to say, okay, well, I could commit to somebody, right? But at the same time, it's that underlying, like, stressy, like, thing is just the sexual part of it is, you know, it's difficult to pin down because, well, first of all, I cannot control myself because I'm a puppet, but second of all, that layer is, I think that there's a possibility, and he's going to kill me, you know, like John the Apostle would kill me, right? John, any of the apostles would kill me for saying this, which is that the sexual layer of it may very well be able to be disconnected from everything else. Meaning it's, I mean, could it? I mean, it is for a lot of people, for, you know, a lot of people, in fact, you know what? I think that they're not in the situation where they're being very realistic, because I think by and large, society is that way today, you know? And most people, I mean, it's relative most younger people, that they're really not thinking about the, you know, depth of intellectual attraction when they're getting together with someone, and that it's kind of like you can elevate to a certain point, and then is it possible to see, like, like an alien form, right? An intellectual alien form, which is far more intelligent than us. They could separate that out. They could say, oh yeah, you know what, I don't see that as a part of a necessary, like, whole picture. They don't necessarily see that as, the end all be all, and that you have to see the whole entire picture, that the complete attraction thing is for everyone, or it's possible for everyone, right? But at the same time, I'm just like, you know what? The reason why certain people, when they do dote on you, it's about the details. It's about your personal details. It's about understanding the personal details of a person. You see how I hate talking about this. Because, like, oh yeah, she is just like, not really wanting to be. Yeah, I'm a bit. Yeah, I didn't come from, like, a background where, like, we talk about stuff like that sort openly. It's not really, it's not. I'm not uncomfortable, but I'm not comfortable. It's just, it's not something that I think about, right? Which is the reason why, like, somebody on the Dark Channels had to tell me this, which is essentially that there's a difference between people who are principles based. Okay. So it's principles first versus details, right? Whereas there's the other part of people who are very personal, okay? You could either be very personal or very principled, okay? But not really both, because the personal details are necessarily so flawed that they're going to essentially trample down any true sense of idealistic principle. Okay, so John the Apostle is on that realm of, here's the principle. He's still very principled and very idealistic, even after all these times. And it's because he's so far above everything else that he's just not able to truly understand the human condition, despite the fact that he's living it, right? There's still some level of ignorance. Right? Because attraction is about the individual, and if you cannot pinpoint what the individual is about, how are you going to get them to really relate with you? Like, you're not relating with them, subsequently they don't relate with you. You could be intellectually admiring each other for eons, but there's nothing personal about that, okay? And I think that's the key, which is that there are people who've probably been interested in the person, the psychological phenomenon, that they know how to connect with people on a personal basis versus to be just holistically principled and, benevolent, okay? And the problem with the, God level entities is that they're principled with the benevolence, but they're not good with exceptions, okay? Because they're taught not to have exceptions, okay? Because exceptions break down commandments. It's like, you don't want for there to be any type of exceptions in the system, but individuals are filled with them. And to not understand what makes somebody tick in detail is what causes rifts in relationships. And you can't get to the level where somebody's really committed to you if your competition is giving away the answer essentially as well. It's true. Somebody is giving away the answer because he knows that if he does, I would be tickled and somebody else would learn something, and he's just gonna look phenomenal. Like, he's just gonna look like a very giving person. Like, oh, I'm not the kind of competitor who's like, going to cover up what I learn. I'll teach everyone, is what he's saying, which is important because, it just makes him look far more generous, first of all. So somebody who's a competitor has pointed out that people who don't really appreciate the details and the exceptions are people who are not going to be able to connect with individuals at a more intimate level. So it's not whether you're sexually attracted or not, and it's not the excess of sexual attraction. It's that the intimate details require an understanding of personal exceptions. Okay? So people are all different, but by and large, humans still have certain tendencies, and you can say like different personality types have certain, characteristics and traits, right? But it's in recognizing the personal details and understanding how that relates to the greater principles and how they are exceptions to that, irregardless of their musical talents, artistic endeavors, whatever else, skills, intellectual, philosophical, depth of thought. Any of those things are on a different plane. And you have to rise above that in order to establish a personal relationship. So this goes back to why I say, oh, you know what, I really want to like this person because everything's like that, right? But the problem is the personal details aren't there. They're not personal. Okay. It's almost like they're just all of that talent, all of those insights, and you're like, oh, they're so amazing, but why don't you fall in love with them? And it's because the intimacy is in the details. So it's how you make an effort to understand those types of details. And it's strange because, you can talk all day long about your personal, background, right? You can know somebody's background in detail, right? But the intimacy is in somehow having insight in that, I think. At least for me. Or maybe I just don't know because somebody just told me, it was just a couple of days ago that somebody told me on the dark channels. And some people are good with relating and really caring about it. And here's the thing. I'm not one who really cares about those things. In fact, I'm totally exactly the opposite of that, which is the reason why I don't connect intimately with people in that sense. Okay? I'm very, understanding. I'm not judgmental. And I'm, overall fairly nice. However, I'm perhaps not understanding, and I don't empathize with the details in that I think it's relevant, because I have to be really honest, I don't think that at this point that we are in terms of human progress, that anybody who has a higher level of understanding of the world should be kind of stuck on the South. They need to be kind of solving the problem. They need to be solving the world problems, not, being like, not like wallowing in self-pity, I suppose. I mean, it's not, so much that one ought to have to go the distance in terms of wallowing self-pity, right? In terms of the details, but to, like, I don't know. I think that I have a really difficult time just... I have a very, like, tremendously difficult time with, like, people's issues, because I think about the numbers of, people who are starving, for instance, or the numbers of people who are stuck in war, or the numbers of people who just got their limbs blown off, or the numbers of people who are struggling with, like, severe mental health issues because of this, chipset technology issue. Okay, I think about things of that sort, and it's so overwhelming that it's really difficult for me to say, like, oh, you had this small thing happen to you. And not to say, like, anything's really too small. It's just... And it's not even that. It's just, I don't think that way, but there's a certain intimacy and caring about those things. And certain people do. Okay? And they do it really well. And they do it very genuinely. In a way that you can feel, you can feel that they do that, because somehow, and I really don't know how they do it, they manage to still care about the individual, and I don't see how they do it. Like, I'm asking myself, like, how do they manage to do this? It's so, like, because they have the high level, insights. It's not that they don't. It's that they have the high level insights. They're of rank, which is high enough, but somehow they find it within themselves to, like, care about me individually. Even as I don't even think that, my circumstances are worthy of the individual attention, because I see that everything else is so bad for everybody else that nobody's individual issues right now are all that important, because I see that, it's really stupid, because in a sense I feel really dumb, because I know for a fact that these issues have been happening for a long time. Okay? It's not like, oh, this happened overnight. No. All these issues have just been, like, progressively building up, right? But how do you get away from, like, that high level thinking? And how is it that people are able to do the high level thing and still manage with the intimate details of people? And it's like, it kind of blows my mind, like, oh, you know what, I'm not sure I have, like, it's got to be a certain talent. If you think about, like, understanding of theoretical mathematics, right? Or something that's really complex and just conceptually very, like, deep, right? Something that's conceptually, like, multi-layered and multi-dimensional, such that you can kind of get it, but you don't get it quite. In science, there's plenty of instances of that, but we don't think about the skills of human psychology in that, we don't think about how certain people have, like, better understanding of people's emotions than others, to a degree that it is as sophisticated as theoretical mathematics. Okay? So I think that,
it really blows your mind when you think about things that way. Like, oh, you know what? People have talent in emotions, and this goes back to like musicianship, which is, oh, why is it, why is it that I can compose something that I find so beautiful, and that perhaps others also find very beautiful, right? Why is it like my music is so heartfelt, whereas it doesn't translate to my emotional being, meaning my cognitive status of understanding people, because I really do have like that pull up your bootstrap kind of mentality. And I'm not sure if that's like a mechanism of self protection or whether it's really a genuine, like, I'm drawing the boundary because I see how significant the world's problems are. I think it's probably a combination of both. But at the same time, it's like if you think about how emotionally one can create music, right? So in terms of music composition, like Bellini, Vincenzo, right? Vincenzo Bellini's people can compose the most heartfelt, like the most absolutely beautiful, and Chopin. Just that absolute, it makes you feel like really rather transcendent, right? And just that feeling, okay? Just being able to feel that should tell you that there's various levels of complexity that has to do with understanding of the human mind and the human condition and the human connections between the emotions and the intellectual part of it. And there's probably just so many different variables that you could layer out. And psychology being a very young science, I think eventually it's going to develop mathematically, okay, to the degree where it's going to, you would have to model, like in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of psychology, right, and psychiatry, there would probably be a lot of definitions of variables, right, to which you could model behaviors and emotions, and that, it's going to relate to particular signals that can be read off of like fMRIs, right? And I think because it's so tangible, actually, our brain signals, our neurosignals are so tangible, and everything from our like temperature to our specific brainwaves to the rate of the brainwaves could be measured, right? So relationships of the future are probably going to be that, like, oh, well, why aren't these people getting along? Well, it's that. Obviously, because I just read your brainwaves. It's going to be like that. That's the future of psychiatry. The future of counseling isn't going to be like a bunch of people just yapping away. It's going to be like, oh, let's see, let's talk. And while you're talking, it's like, you're measuring the fMRI waves in your brain, and you're detecting how many variables, and it's going to measure the variables, and the computing systems are going to measure the variables. It's going to model, whatever is going on, and it's going to, from session to session, it's going to take snapshots and compare to see if you are actually making progress, and if you are not making progress, why. Okay, did I just give a huge lecture on like neuropsychiatry? Probably. The future of neuropsychiatry. Okay, seriously, like, yeah, but it did blow my mind to think about just the variable, abilities of people in terms of just, it's crazy, because I went back and on my listened to an old composition CD, right, that I did before 2020. I did this before 2020, but I compiled it sometime in 2020. But the songs were like, before 2020, and I was like, oh my god, I was literally like, it brought me to tears, because it's such a journey. Like, it spells out such a journey. And the music was so, like, complex and it was so beautiful. It was like, I did this. And I was like, shit, I didn't make much progress, right? And it's like, it depends on, you know, the types of people you're connected to, you know, and that's the neuro chipset part of it. It's like, oh, I'm connected to this very complex, emotionally complex swarm of people. And this is how they think, you know? And then later I'm like, I guess after 2020, I think it's because it's been so busy that everybody, it's fragmented. What I started doing was just fragmented. It was just a little bit more on the practical side, but it was fragmented, and I felt like it wasn't as raw. It wasn't, and I wouldn't say it's not improved, but it's not improved in its depth. It may be improved in its organization in sort of ways. Like, it's a little bit more practical, but the complexity and the depth is not necessarily there. And so I think I kind of went like, oh, okay, this, and then like downwards. I think the stuff that I've been doing most recently is actually stuff I hate the most. Like, I just didn't like what I've been doing, and it's because I'm probably connected to this child swarm, like children. It's more cheerful, okay? It's far more cheerful. It's not deep, and it's not tormented. I think it's a tormentedness, okay, that I find beautiful. I'll tell you what it is. It's torment that you can express in elegance. Okay, that it's a torment in elegance. Like, if you can write your torment out in elegance, that's, you know, that's what that's Bellini, you know, like the capability of expressing torment in elegance. Okay, so going back to, you know, different people and why it is like I so appreciate certain people, but then there's this lack of like romantic intrigue because it's variably like, I think they're just too principled. I think that's really what it is. And when you're too principled, when you're of the order, like, you know, you're a biblical characters like, you know, Ascent or something, like when you're that, then there are no exceptions. It's very, like, the people are very principled to the degree where I wouldn't say they're devoid of relatedness to the human condition. I wouldn't say quite that, but they could probably relate to an ideal human condition, but probably not to the actuality of it, because even as they're like, you know, working their covert operations, and even as they're living it, something's not getting to them. Like, it's not resonating. Like, and I think that, you know, as somebody fairly highly ranked, I may say that I'm a little bit worried, because if they're not capable of really connecting to the intimate details of human lives, then I don't think they're doing a very good job being a creator. Because how can you create if you don't understand human psychology? Okay, so as a creator level person, I'm speaking with creator level people on the psychiatric front who are obviously they're far more advanced than, you know, human psychiatry as de facto what is going on in the medical industry right now, right? In the medical sciences, they're not anywhere close to where the gods are, obviously. So the creators are like, you know, think about this in this complex sort of way, okay, and even more so, because what they're willing to tell me that I could potentially blab out to you is a smidgen of whatever they're working on, which is something you ought to think about. And it's mind-blowing, really. It really is mind-boggling, because, you know, you have to think about, like, just why is it I keep on saying, you know, certain things, like, should I think about it more deeply? And the answer is yes. I should think about things, you know, instead of just, like, poo-pooing away and going, oh, whatever, you know, oh, yes, whatever, I love these people, but I just cannot, like, you know, I'm not attracted to them, whatever. Instead of saying, like, whatever, you know, it becomes a research question of why. You know, why is it, you know, we lionize certain people? We say, oh, we admire them so much, they're like, you know, always seems to be, like, wise, and, you know, they always perform well, and when they don't perform well, they're always, like, you know, they behave with good character. You know, why is it that, you know, these are the people that I personally cannot relate to? And the answer is because they're too, we could call it too perfect, but at the same time, they're too ideal. And that brings the point where, like, yes, they're of the principled type of persons who are governing that. The governing order, the governing ideals, the governing principles, the governing the commandments, the governing those things that are not accepting of the intimate details of people being genetically flawed and having a lot of chaotic things happen in the environment. Okay. And so, should they be any different? I think the answer is perhaps not, because we need, like, different camps who have different understandings of, and they have different roles. I think that, you know, the different camps have different roles in the world, and, you know, and if it's, you know, if it's not your cup of tea because you've decided that's not the camp you want to belong to, then that's just what it is. It is what it is, right? And so, it's, how is it that you're a creator if you don't understand, like, your creation? You know, and that's where I start getting angry. And, you know, I get pissed off. I'm like, you know what? These people don't understand. Because they won't allow themselves to misbehave. Okay? If you don't allow yourself to misbehave, then how do you understand? Like, truly empathize with what you have created. Okay? They'll allow themselves to be victimized, which is what they do in their covert operations, but most of them won't allow themselves to be the criminals. And I think that's a mistake, because if you're creating a biological form and you don't understand the motivations of crime or of unethical behaviors, then you're not going to get anywhere, because you won't validate, you won't verify that there is absolutely no benefits of it, right? Unless you commit the crimes, you're not going to understand whether there just are absolutely no benefits to it, right? So that's the problem. So I think the ideal situation is that they do commit the crimes, but then they, like, make up for it and more, and then pay their penance, right? I think that is the appropriate creator level behavior in covert operations. Okay, it's not to just, like, oh, I'll be the victim and that's it. You know, it's just like, it's very easy to be the victim. I'll just sit here, be the victim, and somebody's gonna kill me, and I'm just gonna be martyred, and that's it. it's not easy to be like the mafia boss and just like, you know, constantly like, you know, running away from like your past or the order, right? So I think that's what I've learned, which is, I guess they're lesser. The principled people are lesser because they've been unwilling to do certain things for the name of creation. And that's the reason why I will not commit to somebody who's just that, you know, principled. If you're just principled, it means you haven't gone through all the other stuff of being vulnerable, of being criminal, of understanding criminality, of just valor. Because the thing is, like, if you created a biological being who's very prone to crime, right? If you don't commit those crimes and you don't follow through their, you know, criminal's footsteps, you don't know why. You don't know the motivations. You don't understand the very, like, you know, psychology, the details of the psychology of what they're going through, and which component is genetic, okay? Because genetic is of creation, and if you're the creator, you better be doing your job, right? So I think that's, you know, the inability to... Yeah, so I guess the inability to be, you know, to understand personal details on an intimate front is an avoidance, and it's a flaw. Okay, I think it's kind of, in a way, laziness. So yeah, that's why I don't feel comfortable, like, you know, because they aren't the whole package. They aren't the whole package because they don't have that understanding of the individual. And it's not just me. It's not just understanding me. It's just like not something like, oh yeah, you know what, somebody's paying attention to me and they understand the details of my life. It's not it's not knowing the details of someone's life. Okay, it's that very, like, and I don't know even how to define it, but it's perhaps appreciating it, perhaps having insights into it, perhaps validating its occurrence. I don't know what it is, but, you know, that's the part that I don't really understand. Like, what is it? Because I don't do it myself. So you know, it's just like, I think there's a lot to learn. Anyways, now I know. Principled people, there's a flaw in idealistic principled people because they're actually kind of simple-minded. They're actually not very sophisticated in terms of understanding the human condition.